Thanks for joining us for another webinar. The topic today is secrets for gaining senior management support for investigations and corrective actions. I get that all right?
You got it perfectly right.
Awesome. So I'm here with Mark Paradise and Amy Souders to talk about it.
Yeah. And when I thought about this topic, I thought about it in more broad terms. I know we said for investigations and corrective actions, which we will address, but just support in general for your projects, initiatives, plans, things you want to get done at work.
Yeah, and you need senior management to be able to support those. So
absolutely,
definitely a helpful topic.
Just think of them all as corrective actions.
Everything, a corrective action. Yes,
everything.
It all ties and is applicable. That's for sure. So we talk to clients, and you hear that a lot from clients that they have things like overdue corrective actions that have never been implemented. Also hear about just problems getting corrective actions implemented, and we've got a root cause on the root cause tree.
Because people don't get the resources they need to do it.
Yep, corrective action not implemented, a root cause on a root cause tree. So we're going to talk about that and the secrets for getting support for your
This
corrective
is
actions.
Amy's secrets.
I love secrets. How many secrets are there?
I think there's 3,
Okay.
but who knows? We could come up with more secrets on the fly.
Okay.
Double secret.
Yes. So, one thing I've noticed when you sit in meetings and discussions and you're talking about things, people never, they aren't shy about complaining about things. People are very willing to talk about problems and things that they see, but people aren't as willing to take on those projects and work on getting something implemented too.
Nobody likes things to be added to their to-do list.
No.
It's easy for negative reviews and things like that as well. People are easy to gripe and complain, but having something positive, you hardly ever hear it.
Yeah, and to take the initiative to go and fix that is like the next step. And I think those people are incredibly important at work, the ones that are willing to take on some of these projects and get those ideas implemented.
I'll say anyhow. The idea is that if you see a snake, kill a snake. Now, I'm not talking about all you snake lovers out there killing friendly snakes. But if there's a problem, you fix it.
Yes, yes. And you're kind of putting yourself out there when you take on those projects and volunteer to try to fix something, because there's a lot of people that could point things out that you've implemented incorrectly or done incorrectly too.
I think there's also a challenge with, I'm more of a finisher than a starter. So you might have people who start projects but then can't finish them. They run into some roadblocks, and so having that support we're talking about is hopefully going to kind of tie into that as well.
I think the interesting ones are the people who want to come up with ideas but don't implement them.
Oh, yeah.
Here's another idea for you. Here,
and assign it
here's
to
one for you. Yeah. I just had the great idea. You're going to do it.
Yes. Yeah, that's always fun. But I think when you're starting one of these projects, wanting to get something implemented, wanting to get your corrective action adopted, I am a believer that you need to get people involved, and that collaboration is going to equate to more adoption of your idea.
So you just don't give them the idea, you have them help you come up with what it's going to be?
Absolutely. I think that is key to support and success for your corrective action or your program or your idea.
When you say people, though, like I'm thinking of the workforce, what type of people, what specific people are we wanting to get involved? Is it everybody?
I think,
Can't get everybody involved.
No,
get
so
everybody involved.
We need a select amount. We're
we've
looking
got
at
time limits here, right?
Yeah. So those key decision makers, getting them on board, getting that buy-in, right? So then they can affect their teams, their divisions, get everybody else on board.
Yeah, I think getting subject matter experts at your company involved and talking to them and hearing about what works well and what's not working well, and learning about what didn't work well in the past. I know I have worked with people that say, well, we tried that in 1993 and it didn't work. And you want to listen to that. You want to know, why did it not work that time, and what's different about today, or what can we do differently the second time around to try to fix it, because that historical perspective is important. You want to capture that and make sure you don't repeat the mistakes of the
Good to
past.
draw that out.
A lot of times it's just the opposite that happens. we said more training last time, so we'll say more training again. And it got approved last time, so it'll probably get approved again. And therefore, you're doing the same things over and over again. Sort of the definition of insanity
Yes,
stuff.
yes.
Oh, we'll
We
just
don't
send you
wanna
off
do
to
that.
training, and that's going to fix it. That's like really the Band-Aid. I think also pulling out, we started off saying how it's easy for them to complain or see problems, faults, and not have a solution. So if it didn't work in 1993, you really have to pull that out to get to why, because I think a lot of people just want to shut it down and just, oh, that didn't work, we already tried that. But if they can't tell you more, then it sounds like just they're complaining and they don't like change.
And the other one is we've always done it this way.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So you can't do it any other way because we've always done it this way.
Always done it this way, yes. I can't remember exactly, but we were talking about this a little bit earlier. We've got a instructor who always says if you want something to change, you have to change. So, if it's a necessity to change, well, something is going to have to change.
So how do you address this, Amy, that everybody thinks change is always good for somebody else but not for them? And I would include that, since this is a senior management topic, if senior management has to change what they're doing, they're usually not in favor of that.
Well, what do you think? What are your thoughts on it?
Oh gosh, you can throw this back at me.
I sure did.
Good technique.
Well, I'll tell you one thing I saw, and I won't tell you what the company is, but they had a major accident, and all the change was directed down in the organization toward the people at the pointy end of the stick, right? And the change wasn't, the change they would take was, if somebody would have told me what my decision was going to cost, I wouldn't have made that decision. So it all of a sudden became, you didn't give me the right feedback rather than I made a bad decision. And so I don't know how you become a senior manager who's willing to change. I know we were laughing before we started this was, well, I don't like to change either. Nobody really wants that. It's always that other department needs to change. That other guy needs to change. It's never, I'm taking it on as my responsibility to change.
I am more open to change when I know the why behind things. I like to have information. So if I know why something is a problem, what's going on, I've got data behind it, or a reasonable explanation as to this is the problem we're having, these are the solutions that we have. If we need to fix a problem, if you present it to me and the why, it makes it more palatable.
So I remember this particular example, and what they decided to do was okay, this was a very high performance company, but they also decided they wanted to be a lower cost company. They were a high performance, high cost company, but they wanted to be a high performance, low-cost company. Now, nobody this consultant presented that idea that you want to be the high-performance, low-cost company, but nobody ever questioned that and said, can you be both? Give me the examples of those high-performance, low-cost companies that we're supposed to emulate. So what they did was they said, well, if we're going to cut costs, we're going to have to cut headcount. And
there's a cost to that.
And if we're going to do that, well, why don't we take, we've got maintenance people and operations people. And why don't we just cut about half of those, and the maintenance guys can operate things and the operators can maintain things. And so we'll only need half as many people. And those safety guys, we don't need hardly any of those anymore. So we can get rid of those. And nobody asked, well, how busy are these people? Can they really take on twice as much work and get it done?
Cut their legs out from underneath them.
And on the safety side, these safety guys had certain, I guess I'll call it maintenance things they did to take care of safety systems. And they got rid of them before they ever figured that out. And then they were like, oh, well, we probably need to bring in contractors to do this maintenance. So there had to be a whole process put in place to hire the contractors, which was it took 9 months. So for 9 months there was no maintenance done.
That's not good.
It's not good.
No.
And you'd think somebody would have asked these questions before they got to that point.
Yeah.
One of my favorite questions is what are the unintended consequences?
That's a good one.
What are the unintended consequences of this decision? Because there's a lot of times, we all kind of work in our own little silo and we're our own little subject matter expert, but that decision that I'm making, how is it affecting other people? That's an important thing to think about.
Another one along those same lines, you're gonna do something, and what are the resources going to take, and where are you going to get those resources from? Because you may be taking those resources away from something that's very important to do something that's less important.
Mm-hmm.
So you really do have to think about what changes you need to make first, and which changes are less urgent, and maybe which changes you don't even want to do because the cost is higher than the benefit. So you really don't want to do them at all. And it's interesting. People. It's like you say, it should be easy to do this, but it's never easy.
Yes, because you're only looking at it from your perspective. In your perspective, it's easy, but everyone else's.
In my perspective, all I have to do is make a recommendation.
Yes.
In their perspective is somebody's got to do this.
So we're still on secret number 1.
We are. We talked about talking to subject matter experts.
Yeah, getting the people on board.
There's other people you need to talk to too. You need to talk to people who are doing the work too, and make sure you get their input. They've got a big say and are important people to collaborate with. Also, talking to people who audit a process or have audited the job. It's another one to get good feedback from too as well.
Well, the other thing is you really need to think about when you recommend something, is that going to require audits to actually get compliance or to measure performance once you implement it?
Talk about other people, subject matter experts. You have to talk to your subject matter experts, but you also need to talk to a variety of people, kind of break those silos, talk to the people who are doing the work, and make sure you get their opinions and feedback. Some of your best ideas will probably come from those folks too, on how to fix something or write a more effective corrective action. Also the people who have audited the process, audited the work, and that's when...
we were talking about audits.
Yes.
And that you may need to know when you need an audit to measure compliance or measure performance afterwards to see if performance is improving once you've implemented whatever that corrective action was that was supposed to fix a problem, and then make sure there's no unintended consequences from the corrective actions, and maybe you need an audit to look for some of those. So you really need to maybe get the auditors involved on the front end to say, what are we going to need to do? The interesting thing I was thinking of, Amy, is sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen when you do something. There's unintended consequences, but you can't look forward enough for those.
No.
So you have to be ready when you make a change to evaluate, is that a good change or not, sort of in the performance you see afterwards.
Absolutely, that's got to be part of your plan, yes. And I think the last thing too is when you're starting to go down this road, you need to also check in and get feedback and talk to those senior managers or your manager and start that process of talking about these things and getting their support early on. And making sure they're still aligned with you in the path that your plan or your corrective action is taking.
So let's talk about maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but let's talk about a specific thing in Taproot.
Okay.
So you're using the corrective action helper and the hierarchy of controls to invent some of your corrective actions. But you mentioned that other people may have good input from the field, but do they know what's in the corrective action helper? Do they know what the hierarchy of controls are? Or are they going to just suggest more training?
You don't know. You don't know until you ask.
What's true? What happens though if you do ask and they say more training?
Well, then you know that you're going to have to probably write a more effective corrective action than that, and that's when you're going to continue to broaden who you're speaking to, but I would think a lot of times when you talk to people, they say this is a problem right here, and can kind of help you identify some things you need to dig deeper on.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say that people who are doing the job don't know what they're doing.
Oh, no, I know.
I'm saying that a lot of times, I remember an example. We had a class, and they were using the tree, and they found out that they didn't have labels on anything, and they thought, well, that's a problem. No labels on the tree, right?
Okay.
You know, it's on the tree under human engineering.
Okay.
No labels.
Pretty simple.
And what would you guess that the corrective action would be?
Well, the corrective action should be that you put labels on things.
If that seems really obvious
It
to me.
seems obvious.
But these guys got up in front of the class and said the corrective action was, if you're operating a valve with no labels, be extra careful.
Oh my.
Wow. Okay.
And to me, it was like, oh, you led the horse to water, but they couldn't drink. Well, that guy should have been more careful. He should have, he should have seen there was no label. And if he didn't know what it was, he should have tracked down the lines to figure out. Of course, the guy thought he knew what it was. How do you know that it isn't what it is when you haven't done that
They
yet?
definitely need more training.
No, just be careful. That works every time. But it's an interesting concept of the guys in the field. They had never seen systems that were labeled. So they couldn't even imagine there being labels. So they couldn't recommend there being labels because it was like, that could never happen.
They were not subject matter experts on labels.
Well, they might have been at their plant because they didn't even exist at their plant. It's part of the thing of it's hard to see the solution when you've never seen it before. If you've only seen it this way, imagining a different way to do it's very hard sometimes.
Oh, there's that example of Steve Jobs, and if he'd asked users, we never would have come up with the iPhone, right?
Well, that's probably true.
Yep,
And they would have come up with a different flip phone. Is what it flips a different way or something.
Yes. All right, so I think we have talked about getting input and collaboration among different users and different people in different departments. Next thing that I think is something that's key is being flexible. Especially when it's your idea and you've come up with this idea and you love this idea. Sometimes when you get that feedback, it's hard to incorporate that. Sometimes people don't want to change their idea, but it's very important. I think you have to change your idea to fit your company's culture, number one, and to include other people's input too as well. So being flexible in that change and the change to your idea or your corrective action is important.
With still maintaining the overall goal.
Yes.
Because if you're too flexible and you get off, target of what you're trying to attempt to even do in the first place, then it becomes a mess. So you have to have that focus on what is the solution we're even trying to do.
I think you have to keep this thought in mind: is what does success look like, and what's the timeline that we're going to implement here. And so you don't want to incorporate ideas that interfere with what that success looks like, but implementing and incorporating other people's thoughts and feedback is important.
So the timeline needs to be flexible as well. So we definitely need a timeline, but have flexibility within the timeline with also the ideas that are coming through.
Well, and you need what's realistic too. I mean, some of these corrective actions, you can't do in 2 days.
This just sounds like smarter goals to me, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Specific.
Let me throw out one more idea on this.
All right.
Rickover has a quote, and I can't remember the exact quote, so don't hold me to it.
All right.
But it has to do about perseverance in implementing good ideas. And even if it's a good idea, if you don't persevere in implementing, it won't happen. And not only that, but after you get it implemented, if you think it's going to stay implemented and you don't have to do anything, that won't work either. You have to be persistent in both the implementation and in the follow-up to keep a good idea happening. Because otherwise people will tend to
drop off to the wayside,
drift back to where they were. They'll drift, and you don't want that.
Other things, I think, you need to add flexibility into your plan too that you're putting together, and giving management options I think is important too. You have your heart set on this one course of action, and that's great, but having a good, better, best and making sure you have some different options too will help you gain some support if you've got some some options for senior management.
Just don't
to
give
review.
them a bad option.
No, we know you don't want to give bad options.
Because that's the one they'll pick 100% of the time.
Or the cheap option.
You mean we could just get rid of half of the people and the problem would go away? I think I know what the answer is.
Yes. I think
It's a good psychology thing too, to like, here's this array of option to choose from, and like you lead them to the one, like they let them deduce, and then they're going like, well, obviously this is the one we're going to pick.
Well, okay, don't think that's obvious.
Yeah.
I had a boss, and he was assigned after the first space shuttle disaster, the Challenger?
In the 80s?
Yeah.
I think so. Is that one with
The
the
one I
O-rings?
remember.
Okay.
It was the O-rings, right?
The O-ring
Yeah,
one, okay. After that happened, the VP level, president level of the corporation decided we needed to do a study to see if we were at all like those bad people at NASA that caused the loss of that space shuttle. So my boss got appointed to be the head of the group that was going to do the study. And I was his assistant in this study, which means you don't get to talk, but you have to give him ideas. And he's going to give the talk. So he's getting ready to do the talk. And what we found out was there were similarities, obvious similarities between our management style and the management style that was at NASA. And he realized that he was going to be up telling the VPs and president that they had an ugly baby. And he realized that was going to shorten his career. So he said, well, Mark, what can we do? What can we do? And he actually came up with the idea. He said, well, I think what we could do is we could just present the facts. And if we present the facts in a thorough and understandable way, they'll come to the same conclusion that we did.
So it didn't happen that way. All right.
He got up and gave the talk, and he finished without saying, and we have same problems here. And the president got up and thanked him. He thanked him. It was a wonderful presentation. I really appreciate the detailed work you did. And it's so good to know that there's nothing here like there was at NASA. And well, you can't take it back at that point. You can't go, no, you're wrong, boss. It's just the same, because he's so happy that it isn't the same. And you'd sit there and go, well, I thought they would have come up with the same conclusion. But they don't, because they see it from a completely different perspective.
Yeah.
Their perspective, it seemed completely different. Our perspective was, it's very similar. And so you can't just generally count on people are going to pick the right answer, because they may have a whole different perspective than you do.
Valid point.
And it's really hard to get somebody to change their perspective. To change, especially when you're senior manager. Imagine, they've worked 20, 30, 40 years to get to the position they're at. And they've got this whole train of experience that's brought them to where they are. And then what you're trying to say is, that experience is no good, my experience is better, you should listen to me and change. Boy, that's really tough. And so it's very unlikely, I think, that you're going to get senior managers to change the way they do things, which then becomes really scary, because if you've got some thing you really need to change, it's going to be very difficult to make that happen. And it's not just presenting the facts and they're going to agree. You're going to have to get them to think the same way you do, which is really a difficult process. So guys on the front line, if you give them a new procedure, they do have some authority whether they're going to use it or not. I mean, they can violate the procedure, right? We all know that. But they have less choices they can make in life than a vice president or president of a corporation can, because they can just say no. And there's very few people who could say, you have to do it this way. Sometimes government regulators can say you have to do it that way, but even that, they may not really do it differently. So it's really hard. It's really, senior management change is really hard to implement.
Well, that's why Amy's got all the secrets.
It's a tough secret to get, though. That one's
Yeah.
really tough, to keep your job and do that.
Right.
So we talked about options. I also think if you can show a test case too, that's another way to gain
Always a good idea.
people's-
In fact, it's good to have a test case just to test your ideas.
Yep, whenever you possibly can. And I think that's some key things about the flexibility, making sure that you're incorporating everyone's input, offering those test cases, giving management options, the good, better, best. I think that helps you gain support for your ideas.
Oh, I got one more.
Okay.
Have a consultant tell them rather than you. And the further that consultant has to fly to get there, the more of an expert that consultant is going to be.
Yes.
And it sounds like I'm telling you a joke, but it's true. I had another friend, he worked at a big consulting company, and they did quality consulting and other things, and they had a quality problem with their own work. And they ended up, this is going to date me too, they ended up hiring the Tom Peters group to come in and give them advice.
Okay.
Anybody remember Tom Peters?
No, I do not remember.
In
Tom
Search of
Peters.
Excellence you were probably about, I don't know, a kid.
Okay.
When the book, it was one of the biggest management theory books to ever come out. And it was back in the 80s. And the whole In Search of Excellence ideas, these excellent companies did things the same way. And you could get these broad swath of companies and learn these excellent ways to do things. And then you could implement them at your company and be excellent too, which, long term didn't really turn out to be so. It's really hard to get people to change. And that's one of the problems is they think they're already excellent. How do you make them change? And so, but the idea was that if you could get everybody to be excellent, that was good. Well, I think it was the president of the company, this big consulting company, calls up the Tom Peters group, and he doesn't even get to talk to Tom Peters. Nobody gets to talk to him, but he got to talk to one of his assistants, and the assistant told him, "Well, we can help with that," and he never asked what the cost of that's going to be.
Oh.
And they just started billing, and it cost all this money. And my friend was like a couple levels down from this president, and he's like, all these recommendations were recommendations we could have made, but nobody would listen to us. But because they were made from the consultants from afar who were charging way more money than we charged, they listened to them. And that's the point of this is sometimes you got to bring in.
You got to be flexible.
We got to be an expert from afar who they will listen to. And that's the bizarre part of it.
Well, as long as they're listening, as long as the consultant was giving good recommendations.
Well, you don't know though. It could be bad recommendations
could
too.
be, but your friend's example, it sounded like they were.
Well, it was the Tom Peters group. They were in search of excellence. They knew all the excellent answers.
But not anymore.
Well, it's time past, right? It's not the 80s anymore. We're now, I don't know.
Into the future.
Gosh, that's like everybody who's retired who read that book probably.
That's 40 years ago.
Yeah.
All right, so we have talked about collaborating with people. We've talked about being flexible and making some changes to your plan. And then we've got to next talk about actually writing this plan. I mean, you need something that's written, that's detailed,
Very
that
good.
Has your vision and how you're going to implement this corrective action or this idea that you have for work. Having a written plan is very, very important.
But don't write it in an email.
Why not?
Nobody reads emails.
I'll stop sending you emails, Emily.
So one thing I think about when writing these corrective actions or implementing this plan or idea of yours is your company's overall goals, things that they talk about in their annual reports, big initiatives that your senior management is responsible for. If there's any way that you can work your plan and your corrective action into aligning with those big company goals, that's really going to help you get support from
Especially if
senior
you can
management.
show.
Yes.
And
If you can show how it
You
does
can't
it.
show in an email. That's why you got to get face to face to present.
Well, that's probably true.
Yes.
Because people
Yes.
skim emails, and so it's really important. You want to look them in the face or
Well,
do
you-
a virtual or
So
something.
an email shouldn't be more than about 2 or 3 paragraphs total anyhow.
Paragraphs.
Well,
What?
a paragraph has 3 sentences.
Bullet points. You want bullet points.
You want 3 bullet points or 3 things. If you start getting more than that,
Pick up the phone.
it's not. It's
Just put it on the
unlikely.
subject line right there.
The subject line.
A never-ending subject until you run out of characters. Yeah. So if it's important, you want to be face to face. have
Yes.
some kind of presentation.
But you still need it written down because you have to go back to it later and say, that's what we said?
Yes.
I don't think we said that, did we?
Well, and I know too, when I have looked at other people's ideas, you want something that's thorough and written down and thoroughly budgeted too. A lot of times people come up with ideas and it's not completely thought out. And if you want to get your idea implemented, you've got to think it through the entire way. And so having it written out in detail, I think.
Test case in there as well, and
Yeah,
graphics, all of it.
It's amazing how many people have an idea but never really scope the work. And scoping the work includes what are we actually going to do and who has to be involved in this.
Yes.
How are we going to do
Because
it?
you'll make a commitment, we're going to do that by next January, but there's some other department or that support it who doesn't have the people to do it by next January. And if you don't scope the work and then schedule the work and then get everybody to agree on these people are really going to work on it, it isn't really an idea yet even.
Absolutely. So if it's aligning with those big senior management goals, your project, your corrective action could become a big win for them and something that they can talk about in their next board presentation or could end up on next year's annual report. So
That'd be cool.
Writing it out, I think, helps conceptualize it, kind of get some of the kinks out too when you're able to kind of see the whole process to then go back and go, oh, you know what, I just realized we have to think about this. And it helps you fine tune it as then you go to present and get the buy-in and have the flexibility. But you really have to flush the idea out completely.
You must be related to Rickover. That was one of his things that he said was that you have to write your ideas down, and especially if you're debating a thing, you need to write down your position, and then you need to give that position to the person you're debating, and they need to give you their written position, so you can really read it and understand why they're thinking the way they're thinking, and why they can understand why you're thinking. And he said a lot of times in writing it down, you recognize the fallacies of your thinking or what isn't really feasible or how much this is going to cost, or boy, this was a great idea, but boy, the implementation is not great. And you'll see those things when you write it down, when you won't if it's just a verbal discussion.
Two, your plan needs to have some metrics too. It's really hard to manage something that you can't measure. So
Absolutely.
you need to have some metrics, baselines of where you are and where you want to go. And how are you going to track that? That's an important thing to put into your plan. And a piece of that comes once your plan is implemented. We talked a little bit about this. You need to be able to continue to get feedback, learn what maybe some of your unintended consequences were from that corrective action
Or if your
plan.
intended consequences are happening.
Yes, and what those metrics are, because you're going to want to be able to report out on those. Once you've had something implemented, if you don't continue to report out on the success you're having, sometimes you can lose support long term if people aren't seeing what those gains are.
They forget what the good things they got are.
Yes.
And they just start assuming that they're going to be there even though you're not putting any energy into it anymore.
Yes. So having that kind of built into your plan and your thought process of, okay, what are the metrics, what are the goals that we're going to try to hit, and how are we going to report out on that is an important piece too.
That's great.
I got nothing to add.
Nothing to add on that
Nothing
one?
to add. I already added it.
I'm not related to Rickover. It's also just
Do
right.
you
I've
know
been in
who Rick
school.
Over is?
Yes, I hear
Okay,
you talk
all
about
right.
him all the time. Admiral, he has a very...
Hyman
Yes, I was about to say he's got
G, which nobody really knows. See, his name really wasn't Hyman, and his last name wasn't really Rickover. He was from, I'll say Poland, but it was a part of Poland that was controlled by Russia at that point. And he immigrated here as a small child, and they just gave you new names when you showed up.
Oh.
So he got a
I didn't
different
know that
name.
part.
He got a
Okay.
different name. So he'd go by H.G. Rickover sometimes, and I don't remember, it was Rickoverstein or something like that. His last name was shortened from, and it was just very. He had a very hard. He was a kid growing up during the Depression in Chicago, in an immigrant family, and you can imagine that was a tough life to start with, and just really made him have a different view than people tend to have today of how you do things.
I think the last thing that I had that I think one of the strengths of the Taproot process is our smarter corrective actions too when it comes to writing this out. We kind of talked about writing a big plan, but within Taproot using that corrective action process that we've built.
Because smarter is obviously better than smart.
That's right.
Absolutely. Well, and smarter incorporates so many of the things that we've talked about today too.
That's true.
That, I think it's a definite advantage to using the Taproot process.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the other thing I tend to think of is there are lots of ideas in the corrective action helper and lots of things you can make into smarter corrective actions, but you really have to look at is that an efficient way to do it? Is that an effective way to do it? Is there some other way to do the same thing that you could do for less cost, less trouble, more efficient? And then I always think about, and this is something that Alex always talks about, is the hierarchy of controls and elimination of the hazard, or elimination, not elimination of the target, but moving the target further away from the hazard.
So Alex likes to talk about the hierarchy of controls,
The hierarchy
right?
of controls, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you need to get rid of hazards so that they aren't there to affect the target, or have less targets. I suppose there's a way to do that. So you really want to think about that, because rather than having somebody wear more PPE, if you could get rid of the reason for wearing the PPE, that would be a more effective corrective action. And once again, if we've always done it that way, sometimes it's hard for people to say, well, we could just get rid of that chemical altogether and we don't need this protection anymore. And people will say, well, that can't be done. Why? Because we've always done it this way.
That's a safeguard, though. You take that safeguard away, even if you remove I would still want to double up. But.
You want to wear two suits.
So the smarter that you're talking about, too, that's an acronym. Specific, measurable, actionable, realistic.
No. Well, specific,
timely.
Measurable, accountable, which means somebody's assigned.
Right. So then
Smart, we got an R coming up there. Reasonable.
timely,
effective,
and
reviewed.
reviewed. Okay.
Reviewed for
Unintended consequences.
That's
Yep.
it.
Well, that's all I have today. Those are all my secrets and a few rabbit holes we went down, but that's all I have today.
Well, we weren't talking about rabbits. We were talking about senior managers. So if we've talked about rabbits, we must be getting away from the topic here. So we should probably say we've completed this for a day. If anybody has any questions, they can always contact Amy. Find Amy Souders on LinkedIn and connect up with her there and send her your questions.
We'll put
Absolutely.
Amy's LinkedIn link in the description for this video, for this webinar.
That'd be great.
Great.
Yeah, and then maybe a blog article that talks about smarter goals and the corrective actions and some of the things we talked about today.
Sure,
So there's
maybe.
some references for all that.
I'm
sure we've already got a smarter article out there
Oh, I know we do.
someplace.
And we have all these Rickover quotes and things about Rickover.
I probably could find his quote and link it up to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's one of my favorites about persistence and implementation, and how hard it is to get a good idea implemented. And that even if it's one of those, if you think it's wonderful, doesn't mean everybody else is going to think it's wonderful. And everybody likes other people to change. Nobody likes their change. And they're always going to, whenever you come up with a new idea, even if you think you've got everybody involved, you're always going to have somebody on the other side who it negatively affects, or they don't like it, or they had that last idea, so now you're criticizing them. And so there's always going to be opposition to change.
Yeah.
Always there's opposition to change. And you need to consider that when you're considering your implementation, because a lot of times it'll hit you out of the blue. How could anybody object to this? This is so obviously right that nobody would be on the other side. There's always somebody on the other side of the table. There's always somebody who thinks their idea was better, and why didn't you implement it? There's always somebody who doesn't like the change that's happening, and it's usually the people who are going to have to do it. So you really need to keep that in mind.
Well, thanks again for being here today, and to our viewers watching and listening, and we will see you guys next time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.